Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're glad you're here. Sorry for the little technical delay in the beginning. But if you have a minute, why don't you drop in the chat where you're calling in from, where you're zooming in from. We're going to be getting into it in just a couple seconds. So make sure before we dive into things that you have a pen and the PDF that you should have received an hour or so ago so that we can do your Denali assessment. If you don't have or didn't have time to get that PDF printed, we'll shortly be sharing a link so that you can do the assessment in real time online. This is going to be interactive, so get comfortable and get ready to participate. Let's introduce our hosts. I'm Lisa Thompson, and today I'm also joined by Anthony Lorubbio. I'm the founder of Alpine Athletics and also the owner of Mountain Madness. And I've spent the last 2 decades climbing big peaks like Everest and the Seven Summits. And what I enjoy doing now is sharing what I've learned during that time with other people through Mountain Madness and Alpine Athletics and helping other people achieve their goals in the mountains, which is what we're going to talk about today. I'll let you do a quick intro as well, Anthony.
Hey everybody, I'm Anthony Lorubbio. I'm the founder of a company called Recal Training. We specialize in breathwork training for mountaineers. So I guess in a similar way, Lisa said she has a goal, and that is that she helps you achieve your goals on the mountain, whatever summits that you're gunning for. I do the same, just I use breathwork training. So it's a combination of dialing in your breathing mechanics and then also making some really key adaptations in your body using breathwork training that can then serve you better on the mountain.
Perfect. And we're going to be talking more about that today. So here's where we're headed. Um, we are going to talk about why Denali is one of the most challenging of the seven summits. And then, as I said, we'll do an assessment to see what your readiness based on about 10 different criteria. And then we'll talk about a precise system that takes climbers from uncertain to absolutely ready for everything that Denali is going to throw at you. Let's get grounded a little bit in sort of the reality of Denali. So if you're on this call, you probably know most of these things. Maybe you've been on the mountain before, so you know to expect an expedition that's about 3 weeks in duration. Um, the vertical climb, this is so interesting about Denali, especially when you compare it to other peaks in the Himalaya, for example. So on Denali, from the time you land at base camp until you get to the summit, you'll be climbing about 13,000 vertical feet, which is a lot more than many other mountains. Of course, along the way, you're going to experience minus 40, maybe minus 20 wind chill, particularly on summit day. And those first few days, week or so that you're on the mountain, you're going to be carrying a backpack plus hauling a sled that weighs somewhere between 75 and 90 pounds. So it's a big physical effort. And that effort is sustained at above 14,000 feet for a couple of weeks. There can be frequent weather delays. One of the things I love about Denali is that it just feels like such a like real mountain. Like this is the way mountains were meant to be climbed. And all of those things contribute to a pretty low success rate. So if you look at national park data, they keep track of success rate. It's about 50%. And we've, looked into why that is. And certainly weather is a huge factor for all the reasons I just talked about. But the other thing that we see is that people just aren't prepared mentally or physically for such a big mountain. And that is a combination, I think, of physical, mental, psychological demands that people either underestimate or don't have the tools to be able to pull out when they need them on the mountain. And so that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today. The other thing that is key, I think, to success, and I don't always like using the word success when it comes to summiting, but to having a good experience and climbing in good style on a big peak is mental toughness and mental resilience. And this, I think, is what a lot of climbers overlook, or it somehow gets them, you know, caught up in this like negative narrative that can start to just play on repeat in our brains. I've so many times seen climbers that are ready physically, but still fail to reach their goals because their head isn't in it or they don't have the tools to navigate difficult things. And this is something at Alpine Athletics that we've been working on for about a year to build a really solid mental toughness, mental resilience program that's meant for people who are climbing mountains. You can find a lot of them that are specific to other sports or specific to other types of performance, but not specific to us as mountaineers and climbers. So I'm really excited to start to share that as a part of this program. And you can see on the slide just some of the other challenges that we all have to endure when we're on a big peak like Denali. So let's talk a little bit more about some of those things. Another thing that's interesting to me, I think, is that, and people overlook this, is how rapidly you're gaining altitude on a mountain like Denali. I think that catches people off guard. So base camp, when you land on the Kahiltna Glacier, is about 7,200 feet. And then you're going to gain over the course of the next 3 weeks or so elevation to get you up to the summit at 20,300. If you compare that to another big mountain like Everest, it will take about, if assuming you're walking to Everest Base Camp and then continuing to about the same elevation as Denali Summit, which would be on Everest Camp 1, it takes you 5 or 6 weeks to get there in the Himalaya. So there's really this contrast of how quickly you're gaining elevation, and that's something that people aren't always ready to deal with or don't think about. So, what do we do about all of this? There are many things on a mountain that you can control. Sorry, that you cannot control. Weather certainly is a big one. Teammates, just little annoyances, sort of, the stress of being on an expedition. But I realized very early on when I was really trying to give myself any kind of edge that I could find that there are a lot of things that are within my control. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Um, One of the things that I've added to my mountain prep protocol, thank you, Anthony, is doing breath work. And it was something that I just like, I had known about breath work and I had, done a lot of yoga and understanding how different types of breathing can affect you, but I really just didn't connect the dots to think that there was a way that a breathwork protocol could help you acclimatize and help you perform on the mountain. So we'll turn things over to Anthony for a second. So since we have him today, I want to make sure that we're really getting his input about how breathwork can help us on big peaks.
Sure. So, hey everybody, happy to be here, and thanks, Lisa. You have gone through some of our breathwork training, so cheers to you. And I know we've had a few mutual clients that have done it before and climbed big mountains. Even yesterday, one of our clients who had climbed Aconcagua last year, I know we worked together with that one. So from a breathwork training standpoint, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the word breathwork, and that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In this context, when we're talking about how to use it to help you train for a mountain, we're not just talking about breathing protocols in a meditation sort of way to maybe get your mind into the right place to take on a challenge. We are literally talking about a training program that changes your physiology in advance of you actually then taking on your big challenge. So when we think of breathwork training, number one, most people do overlook it as a critical part of their training. They train their legs, they train their cardio. Few really think about how they're breathing until potentially it's too late and they are on the mountain and they realize just how big of a challenge it is to breathe. If you've been at high altitude, of course, you're probably saying to yourself, oh, yeah, Anthony's right about that, that it is hard to breathe on the mountain. So we approach breathwork training from a four kind of base standpoint. And in fact, we use an acronym BASE. B means building better breathing mechanics. So, how do you actually breathe? Do you engage your diaphragm? Do you get air deep into your lungs, which is where most of oxygen diffusion into the bloodstream actually occurs? The A in base is making altitude adaptations. This is both in a combination of breathwork protocols that get your body hypoxic to deal with some of the low oxygen, but also something called hypercapnic, which is high carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is one of the triggers that makes you feel out of breath. So if you can train that to feel less out of breath, then you're going to maintain better breathing mechanics at high altitude. The S in base is strengthening your respiratory muscles. And this is key because the air is much thinner at high altitude, which means it takes more effort for you to inhale that lower pressure air into your lungs. That extra effort that it takes to get air into your lungs, oftentimes, for those that haven't conditioned their respiratory muscles, it fatigues those muscles. And if those muscles fatigue, then you're obviously going to struggle to get the air in to your lungs. And this is a critical factor to, at this point, the data point that's on here, actually maintain good oxygen saturation levels. So some of the ways that you can do that, of course, is training your respiratory muscles to handle that low pressure air, but also training your breathing mechanics so that you breathe better to keep your oxygen saturation levels higher. And the E is really just elevating your performance, bringing everything together, elevating the performance with some on-mountain breathwork training protocols to help your oxygen saturation levels. If you're feeling acute mountain sickness in some way, there's different protocols you can do, help with recovery during acclimatization hikes and things of that nature. So that's kind of the base, no pun intended there, literally base of what breathwork training can do for you in advance of your expedition and then on the mountain itself.
And I will say, and Anthony and I joke because I've had many stops and starts to breath work, but um, the biggest differentiator for me was the hypercapnic work and like
Mm.
training my body to like you can actually train for that feeling of breathlessness, which
Mhm.
and it was really cool to like see that play out even just in training if I was running uphill and normally would feel out of breath to know that I had better mechanics to control that.
Yeah.
So definitely worth
And
it.
And to build on that point, if I may just quickly here, you mentioned the carbon dioxide tolerance, right?
Hmm.
You can train your tolerance to that feeling of carbon dioxide rise in the blood, which makes you feel out of breath. There's a part of your overall Mountain Madness assessment, which is the breathing part of the assessment. And one of the critical pieces of this, and I'm just throwing this out there for everybody to have a heads up, one of the assessments that we do is literally called a carbon dioxide tolerance test. It's very simple. You take a deep inhale, fill up your lungs as much as you can, start a timer at the very top of that inhale, and then try to extend the exhale as long as you possibly can. And that number that you end, that is your carbon dioxide tolerance test. You're going to deal with a lot of that feeling of breathlessness as you're very, very, very slowly exhaling. And that's one of those metrics that you can track and actually improve over the course of a CO2 tolerance focused training component of an overall breathwork training program.
And
So
mine was pretty horrible in the beginning.
you improved, Lisa, okay?
Okay, well, let's get down to it. We promised an assessment for everyone. So, what we're the and Anthony mentioned the Mountain Madness score. So, in an effort to create this idea of, what does it really mean and how ready am I for any given peak, we've put together a Mountain Madness score. And as a coach, probably the most frequent question that I get from athletes is, am I ready? How do I know that I'm ready? And I felt like I use Training Peaks and it gives you a piece of an answer to that question, but I never really had a great like holistic answer to are you ready to climb a big mountain? And so that's what this is. So today we're going to go through a condensed version of the Mountain Madness score. Like I said in the beginning, you all should have received a PDF an hour or so before with or an email with a PDF of the assessment. And Andrew, if you can drop in the chat now the link to do it online as we go through it, it will automatically calculate your score for you. You'll get that link afterwards if you want to just have the online version and don't have to do the math. So this assessment covers your physical capability. We're going to look at where you're currently at for training. We're going to talk about altitude experience, physiology a little bit, and then also mental and logistical readiness. So let's get into it if everyone is ready. The first question is training volume. So be honest here. Um, I say probably once a day that consistency is really the key to building your fitness. So think about how consistent you are right now with training. If you're not training at all or it's very sporadic, that's give yourself 0 points for that. You can see sort of the scores there. If it's, 1 or 3 times a week, score that. And if you're doing, something more like 5 or 6 times a week, and it's specific, I want to point this out, it's specific to Denali. It's not hit, not to pick on hit, but it's not the kind of training we need if we're endurance athletes. So if what you're doing is consistent, but it's not specific to Denali, then that would be 2 points. So I'll pause there for a second, give everyone a chance to make their assessment. And then next, we want to look at vertical capability. So can you currently complete 3,000 vertical feet with a 40-pound pack? This is a pretty typical assessment that we use for people who are getting ready to climb Rainier in the Cascades. If not, that's 0 points, and then you can see sort of how things play out from there. You want to also assess like can you do it, but is it slow and hard? Maybe downgrade yourself a little bit there. And then you'll see, thinking specifically of Denali in this case, we'd like people to be regularly training and gaining 5,000 plus feet with a 60-pound pack. What we've seen is when people are able to do that consistently and not be just wrecked the next day, that they have the vertical capability for what Denali is going to demand of you, especially on those, days lower on the mountain where you're pulling a sled and carrying a big pack. So I'll pause for another second so you guys can do your scores. And then moving on to cold weather experience. So have you spent time in the cold before? Have you been on an expedition on another big peak? And then look at like if you have some experience, but the temperatures are more like 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, that would be 1 point. If you've had some regular training or experience at temperatures that are more like 0 to 10, that would be a couple of points. And if you've had climbed in the Himalaya, climbed on Vinson, and have extensive experience in, sub-zero conditions, that would be 3 points. So assess your experience there. And then question 4 is similar but related to altitude. So what's the highest you've successfully climbed? If your highest peak is under 12,000 feet, that's 0 points. If you've been up to 16,000, that's 1. And if you have multiple summits in the 16 to 18,000 foot range, that's 2 points. And then if you've been beyond that and felt good with acclimatization, you can give yourself 3 points. And now we're getting to breath work. Um, do you want to take this one, Anthony, or I can talk through it? Does it matter?
Yeah, sure, I can take this. And again, uh, so breathwork can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and I do think it's very fair for us to call that out here. So if you don't in any way do any sort of breathwork meditation, even that'd obviously be 0. If you have some breathing exercises that you do, but they're even for more of a mindset or meditation style of breath work, then I would say that's that 1 point. If you are training your breathing, maybe using an air resistance device, maybe you even have an altitude mask that you put on and then actually train with that, something that's like resisting the muscles, excuse me, resisting the air as you breathe to then train the muscles. That would fall in that 2 point category. And then number 3, if you're not only doing those things I just mentioned and you're doing some sort of intermittent hypoxic altitude specific style of breathwork training protocols. Maybe you actually know who I am and Recal is and have done some breathwork training because I don't know many people that are out here doing breathwork training for mountain athletes. If you've done some of my work, then you could absolutely put 3 points for that.
Awesome. Hopefully there's a lot of 3 points.
I hope.
And next we're going to move on to recovery, which I think similar to breath work is something that people often overlook. I was certainly guilty of this myself for quite a while. I just felt like I needed to be pushing hard all the time and I didn't have time to recover. I didn't make time to recover. And this, recovery is really where your body grows and gets stronger. So it's an essential part of any sort of training program. If you don't have any, if you're like me in the beginning and you don't have any sort of structured recovery plan, you can give yourself 0 points. If your recovery is, I would call passive, and you're, really focused just on getting good sleep, which is super important, that's 1 point. But if you, in addition to sleep, incorporate things like, making sure you've got a lot of protein to recover from a nutrition perspective, if you're doing like cold plunges or contrast therapy or massage, give yourself some more points, and then all the way up to doing breathwork training, that would be 3 points. So think about where you're at there. And then, oh no, what happened? Um, we're going to leave it like that. We had some trouble with Canva, so we're just going to roll with it. Um, so next, we're going to talk about expedition experience. So have you been on a multi-day expedition before? If so, give yourself 1 point, depending on the duration and the quantity of those trips. And this really is, I think people overlook um, the skill or the resilience that you build by being on an expedition. I've, coached many athletes who are absolutely fit enough and skilled enough to climb a particular mountain, but they really struggle with just being away from home or family or work, or, sleeping in a tent for 3+ weeks. So this is an important factor to consider in terms of how ready you are for a big expedition like Denali. So score yourself accordingly there. And then next, we want to talk about fear management. So getting a little bit into mindset. And this really has become one of my favorite things to talk about and to help people with. So if you have not done any sort of formal mindset or mental training, that's 0 points. If you have some exposure, maybe you've listened to some podcasts and you have a couple of tools handy when you find yourself in a fearful situation, that would be 1 point, all the way up to giving yourself 3 points if you've worked with a mental performance coach and really dug into your specific mindset and have some tools and strategies that you can employ to get you through difficult or fearful situations. So score that for yourself. And then next is logistical preparation. When I started Alpine Athletics 8 years ago, this was one of the key pillars that I wanted to help people with, because there's just so much more to preparation than physical or even mental preparation. But how logistically ready for you are you for your climb? And you can see here we lean heavily on gear, but I would also add, have you studied the route? Do you know what the elevation gain profile is going to be like each day, and the mileage and the duration of each day? Do you know what your pack weight is going to be? Do you have all those things really understood and studied and dialed, so that when you get to the mountain, when you get to the trailhead, you know exactly what to expect and you're not encountering things that are new and novel, which then leads into, challenges from a mindset resilience perspective. So assess where you're at there. And then the other key piece is just medical readiness. So have you had a consultation with a physician? You can see the scores there all the way up to, like, have you talked to someone who has high altitude experience? And this, there are not a lot of people, not a lot of physicians who have this level of experience. But I, regularly, as I coach athletes and ask them this question and encourage them to see their regular doctor, those regular doctors understandably are not skilled or don't have knowledge about what it means to be at altitude or what it means to be on an expedition. So really working with someone that has altitude specific medical training can be key to understanding your physiology and how ready you are to take on a big peak like Denali. So now we get to calculate your score. I'll give everyone just a couple seconds to do the math if you need to. If you're following along online, you should see that score at the bottom. of the website, and we'll get into what those scores mean next. So if you have, bear with me here. If your score is between 25 and 30, 30 being the max, you're where I would expect you to be 6 months out before Denali. It means that your foundation is strong. There certainly can be some things that you do to optimize. And that's what our coaches are here to help you with, to eliminate any sort of remaining variables or unknowns. But you're, I think, a climber who would benefit the most from some sort of expert integration and preparation to just get you through that final stretch, get leading up to Denali in 6 months. If your score is a little bit lower, so if you're between 18 and 24 points, you have a solid foundation. It's not where I would ideally want it to be leading in, 6 months out from Denali. There are some gaps, but you have certainly the capability with the right focus to understand those specific gaps and weaknesses, how they might affect your Denali climb, and then you have the runway to work through those with a coach so that you're as prepared as possible. I think these are people who can get from sort of maybe to absolutely ready with a lot of focus and help from a coach. Let's see. Now, if your score is a little bit lower in the 10 to 17 point range, now's the time to really start thinking about preparation. I would say, still have the time. If we, had this conversation in 2 months, probably would make a different recommendation. But you really need a comprehensive system, not just more training. So it's a matter of focusing on all these areas that we've talked about and making sure that you've got some guidance, because what you don't have is the luxury of time if you're in this range. And so my often what I do as a coach is take some of the slack out of the equation so that you don't have to focus on like putting a training plan together, figuring out what your meal plan should be. This is where, given the time that you have and where you're at in terms of preparation, it's very nice to just hand things off to a network of coaches in this case that are going to take care of those things for you so that you don't have to worry about it. And then if your score is below that, so if you're in the 0 to 9 range, definitely not where I would want to see people leading into Denali this season. It might be too ambitious of a goal. And so maybe a different mountain in 2026 would be a good idea, and planning for Denali in 2027. I still believe that it's worth a conversation with someone from the Mountain Madness or Alpine Athletics team to talk about what that preparation could look like and getting you ready for the next step so that you're ready for Denali. I think all of our goals are to show up, in Talkeetna with all the skill and experience and confidence that you have what you need to tackle anything that mountain is going to give you. I find, just personally, when I think about my preparation, it's very important for me to understand the demands of the mountain. And it feels to me disrespectful to the mountain to show up and not be ready and not have done the work and not have put in the time to make sure I have the right skill, the right experience, the right nutrition program, the right breath work skills to move efficiently and successfully in that mountain and contribute successfully to the team. So I want to talk about precision preparation. This is really like the culmination of everything I've learned in the mountains. This is what I think takes people from being relatively prepared to being 100% confident when they get to, in this case, to Talkeetna. So I very early on realized that when I was training for big peaks like K2 and Everest, that there was more to it than just being physically prepared. And that's a big reason for my starting alpine athletics. I didn't start training this way. I started training for expeditions the way most people do, which is that you hire a strength coach who probably is associated with a local gym and doesn't have any experience in the mountains, certainly doesn't understand altitude physiology. Maybe you follow a nutrition plan, but again, that plan could be coming from a general registered dietitian who doesn't understand what it's like to be an endurance athlete, probably doesn't understand caloric demands in cold environments. Very few people, as Anthony said, think about breath work, and all of that is not an integrated system. Um, so, meaning your mental preparation happens in isolation from physical reality and your specific fears or goals. And I see people spending months trying to manage all of this in a way that is most beneficial to them. So that really is why I put together this idea of precision preparation. I think did we skip a slide? No. So the idea is that you have one solution, four experts all working with you. Your breathwork coach knows what your training volume is. Your nutritionist knows your expedition timeline and understands the demands of that mountain. You're working with a physician that has high altitude experience. And with your consent, each coach is familiar with your medical history. Your mental performance work is timed with is designed for your personal fears and concerns, and you just have this cohesive package. And this to me is this is how I train now. When I'm getting ready to climb in Mexico in a couple of months, and these are the experts that I work with in order to get ready. And so it's exciting to bring that along with a Mountain Madness expedition for a mountain that's challenging like Denali. So the details, you can see them here. So it's 6 months of personalized coaching with me and Anthony. So that includes, integrated into Training Peaks, your tailored coaching program, training program, along with Recal's breath work. We will meet once a month to walk through the integrated program and your progress. About 2 months out from your Denali departure, we will start talking about mindset. So, as I said, this is a program that I've been working on for the past year, along with my performance coach, Tori Higgins, to tailor something that's absolutely specific to climbers and mountain athletes. And I'm super excited to start to share that with people. Going back to breath work, you'll work with Anthony in 3 group sessions that are an hour and a half each. That's in addition to the specific training, breathwork training that will be loaded for you in Training Peaks. And then you'll work with Alyssa Lieb on your specific for a plan that's specific to you and your nutrition on Denali. I mentioned medical consultation and working with a high altitude physician. So my dear friend Tracy is going to help out as one of the experts as well, which I'm super excited about. She's actually going to join us on our next webinar next week. She's the only American woman to summit all 14 8,000-meter peaks and is a physician and has worked as a physician doctor worked as a physician on multiple expeditions. So you'll have 3 consultations with her. The other thing I think that I mentioned this earlier, that is special about this program is that the Alpine Athletics team will be coordinating everything for you, so that there's just instant, constant communication between you and this team of people that are helping you prepare. So thinking about the timeline, we're about 6 or so months out from Denali, depending on if you're climbing in May or June. So we're kicking things off this month. There'll be a monthly progression with integrated check-ins, and then you'll depart for Denali fully prepared. So what this replaces, like I really like to sit down and look at like if you did all this stuff together, what would it look like, and just run some rough numbers. All these things are in the thousands of dollars. And I'm, fortunate to have worked with these coaches myself and to be able to bring this offering and this program to you at a much lower price. So what that looks like for Denali is 27,800 for this whole package that includes the expedition through Mountain Madness. You can see the breakdown there. And I fully realize that's a big investment. And so we've got monthly options for payment. And if that just doesn't work for you, we can talk about other things. Like I fully appreciate that, we're the working or climbing in the mountains is not a cheap endeavor. And my goal is to help, and Anthony's goal is to help as many people as we can be as prepared as possible for big peaks. So if that, payment plan isn't ideal for you, then I'd still love to talk about working out something that works better and feels better for you. So if you're ready to get started, here's the next steps. Let's skip this slide. It's just sort of the the rollout. So the first step is to start with a 30-minute call with me just to make sure that you're an ideal candidate for this program. We want people that are committed to climbing Denali, that are committed to training in this holistic manner. We'll review your readiness assessment as well, since you've done that, and just discuss your Denali timeline and goals to make sure that everything's a good fit both for you and for us. We'll be doing enrollment and onboarding through the end of December, and you can secure your spot on that with a deposit. There are, of course, intake forms, and then we'll get you scheduled for consultations, initial consultations, which with each of the experts that I describe. And just a quick note about who this is for. I mentioned this previously, but we really want to work with people who are taking Denali seriously. It's not just sort of a casual bucket list climb. I think you're ideal if you value this expert guidance over sort of DIY preparation and training, and you want a very coordinated, holistic approach to getting ready for Denali. The people who have signed up so far for precision preparation have attempted Denali a couple of times and things just haven't gone according to plan. They weren't as prepared or as fit as they knew they needed to be, and they want to go back one more time and make sure that they've, pulled every single lever they can to be as ready as possible for climbing. So if you want to schedule that discovery call, here's a QR link that you can use. And this will be sent out afterwards as well if you don't capture it now. I want to make sure you saw pictures of the team on some as background to some of the calls or some of the slides, but just want to highlight that again. So you'll be working directly with each of these people who have, experienced climbing in the mountains themselves or coaching people to be successful mountain athletes and are really dedicated to you being as prepared as possible for Denali. So just one last sort of reminder, we're 6 months away. This is usually when I'm getting ready for an expedition, when I'm starting to get stressed. 6 months away. And if you're serious about summiting, this to me is where preparation becomes precision, where you're working with experts that are making sure that all of your time is focused just on getting ready for Denali. So I will pause there. We're near the 45-minute mark. I don't know if there are any questions that I can answer. If not,
Lisa, it seems like there was a Q&A that came in.
yeah,
If you
let's hear
want
it.
to, I can
Yeah,
throw that your way. Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
I can be a good co-host, I guess.
Thanks, Anthony.
Um, yeah. So Danny asked, how do we find a doctor who has that altitude specific training or experience maybe as well?
Yeah, so I would probably start by Googling it. There are not a lot of them, and they seem to be located in mountain areas. So Tracy Metcalf, who we're working with for this program, is located in Colorado. Excuse me. Anthony Lux is located at the University of Washington in Seattle. Those are the two that I work with most closely and regularly and will take. I know Dr. Lux takes insurance, and his last name is spelled Luks. So I would seek out one of them because they do consultations, even if you're living in other states. So those are the two that I would check out, Danny. Any other questions?
No others in the chat that I see.
Okay,
Oh,
cool.
yes, there's a question from Amit. Sorry. Is there a time factor for this Q2? Is there a time factor for this Q2? I don't know Do you maybe understand that?
Not sure exactly what you're getting at there. But the program is 6 months long. Maybe that's what you were getting at. And we're starting it now in the month of December so that people are ready for departures, Denali departures in either May or June. Um, but I think was it Ahmed that asked that question, Anthony?
Amit, yeah.
Ahmed?
Yeah.
If you want to reach out to me directly with, if that didn't answer your question, reach out to me directly at lisat@mountainmadness.com, or you can respond to the email summarizing this webinar that you'll get later today, and we can make sure you get your question answered.
Yeah. There's also a question here from Josh. How many people does Mountain Madness put on a Denali rope team?
Yeah, so the expedition size, the team size is 9, and that includes 6 climbers and 3 guides. So the ratio is 2 to 1. Good question.
From from Mike, we've got a question. This is fun.
This is
If I never climbed over 12,000 feet, is it possible to summit Denali?
great question, Mike. I think that it is. Certainly people have done it. I think what it means for you is working with a coach who can help you understand what it means and what it feels like to be above 12,000 feet. So the difference between 12 and 20. Denali has this is sort of unique situation as well, that it's so far north and the atmosphere is thinner. So it actually, instead of feeling like 20,000 feet, people say it feels like 24,000 feet. But it is possible. I think it just takes more preparation on your part to make sure that you're ready and you understand how hypoxia affects your body and have some tools so that you can work through it in a safe way. And I know Anthony's probably dying to say that breathwork will help you as well in those environments.
Yes, breathwork will help you. Breathwork training, a bona fide actual approach it like you're training your legs, but you're training your breath does make a huge difference on something like Denali. So,
Yeah.
yes, it's not just for mindset protocols, which is what I believe a lot of people do think of when they think of breathwork. This
Hmm.
is like bona fide training for it. So I agree with your point.
Yeah.
There
Great.
was a Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say if there are any others,
Yes, there are. I'll just keep it rolling.
keep it rolling.
Amit actually clarified his question. He said he meant for the climbing part of the assessment, that vertical feet, I think, 0 through 3. He asked if there was a timing component to that. So is there a certain time that you should be
Oh,
able
like
to
within.
theoretically go 5,000 feet in with the 60-pound pack?
Oh, so for this, there isn't, when we do the full Mountain Madness score, there's a question that talks about time, how long it takes you to ascend 1,000 feet. In this case, though, there's not. So it's just that you
Mhm.
have been at those elevations and ascended that much vertical feet. Good
Mhm.
question.
Cool. From Gene, we've got a question. Is 40 years old a good age to start Denali training?
Well, I summited Denali. I think I was 40 when I summited. Seems like a long time ago. Um, yeah, I think a few things. As we age, and I'm 53 now, so as we age, our physiology changes. For me, I just don't move as fast as I used to in the mountains. And I started to notice those changes when I got to about 45. So I think that if you're 40, it's absolutely a great time to start. I think having the other thing that I think about with age is discernment and wisdom. And so, especially if you're 40 and you've spent some time climbing, in Ecuador or in the Cascades, and you've been at elevation and started to just really get comfortable in mountainous environments, on an expedition, then you come to Denali with some amount of discernment as well to say, this is how my body feels at elevation, or these are risks that I'm willing to take and risks that I'm not willing to take, or I know that I start to lose my appetite at about 15,000 feet. You have all that knowledge and experience that I think makes you a better teammate on the mountain and puts you in a better position to be successful, whatever that might look like for you. Really good question.
Love that. And I'll just throw out one thing as
Yeah.
well. I have a lot of clients that are 60 years or older that are climbing
Mm-hmm.
incredibly high mountains, and they're using the wisdom that they have to change their preparation, I think,
Yep.
more than anything, which I think is really where the precision preparation comes into it. It's a matter of preparing appropriately. I think, yeah, if you're in your late 20s, early 30s, pride maybe aren't you're just going for it potentially more. And I don't want to put everybody in that bucket, of course, but I do think that from my experience, many of our climbers through Recal have done breathwork training programs and summited some of the
Yeah.
tallest mountains in the world. So at over
Yeah.
60. So
And I would, the last time I looked at the average age of Alpine athletics athletes, it was 46, I think.
hmm,
Um, and our success rate is 72% across all the mountains that we've coached people for. So I do think with age comes discernment, and it'd be interesting. I love data. It'd be interesting to see if like age versus success and like where
hmm,
the break even point is or how that plays out. Maybe I'll do that in my spare time.
have fun. We have a question from Carson.
Cool.
If one has a lean mass slash endurance body type, how
Yeah.
do you think about adding additional body fat for Denali in preparation for the
Yep.
cold and the caloric demands on the mountain?
Yeah. So this is an awesome question. Thank you for asking it, Carson. And you'll get different opinions about this. I've, heard people say you need to be adding weight because you're just going to lose it. And that is not my view at all. I think if you are lean, and you're going into climbing a big peak like Denali or Everest, that you want to stay lean because if you start to bulk up, probably what you're going to be adding is fat, which is not very functional on a mountain. Also, any additional weight that you put on, even if it is muscle, has to be oxygenated at elevation and you have to physically carry it to elevation. So if you're used to, weighing, like I'll just use my weight, if I'm used to weighing 120 pounds and I decide I wasn't going to weigh 125 before a big expedition to give myself a little wiggle room for what I lose, that's added stress to my skeletal system that it's probably not used to carrying. I would rather people stay lean and worked with a nutritionist to get really good strategies for not losing weight at elevation. And that's very
Hmm,
personal. I'm fortunate that I could eat anywhere at any time. Other people, start to lose their appetite at base camp. And so having some food that that works for you or some strategies, sometimes even medication to help you get through that so that you're not losing huge amounts of weight, I think is a much better strategy than bulking up.
cool.
Awesome question.
Donal asked the question, what's the single easiest way to incorporate or improve breath work? Oh, this is maybe for me.
Oh, it's for you,
Breath work into
Anthony.
your exercise routines, as in the smallest change or additional exercise that has the most benefit then. Wearing a mask, something you do while doing other aerobic based training. Okay, great question, Donal. So I always say the first thing that you can do as part of your breathwork training program is just understand. Well, first of all, take the Recal Breath Index assessment just to understand how you breathe today. As Lisa mentioned, you need a starting place. You need to understand that's, of course, what we're here doing with the readiness assessment. You need to know where you are today. And so there's something called a Recal Breath Index, which is a part of the Mountain Madness score as well. So it's understanding where and how you breathe. So once you have an understanding of that, that is the base criteria. Then the thing that I would say to best incorporate into your training itself has to do with your carbon dioxide tolerance. And more than anything, it's shut your mouth. And what I mean by that is close your mouth when you're training. This is going to force your nose to do the bulk of your breathing. And that is number one, it's going to resist the air already on the way in. It's going to help to train the respiratory muscles. But number two, and most importantly, is it's going to help train that carbon dioxide tolerance because you're going to be battling that feeling of breathlessness often. And over the course of months here, you're going to build that carbon dioxide tolerance. And before you know it, your nose hopefully is doing this is a long term play, everybody. Hopefully, your nose is doing more of your breathing. And when you arrive on the mountain and you face that cold, dry air, you're not primarily using your mouth to do that breathing because that brings in that cold, dry air. It can inflame your lungs. Direct injection of cold, dry air is not ideal for the lungs. That can lead to more respiratory issues on the mountain. So if you train your nose, the nose knows what's best here, and it can help you on the mountain. So without going into a whole lot more, I would just say the easiest thing to do starting today is to shut your mouth.
And it's funny because at some point, Anthony and I were talking. I was like, "There's no way I like run with my mouth open," and I actually do. Like, I was shocked. I was like, "Oh my God, I actually do open my mouth when I'm like running and exercising," and it makes a difference. But it's not. Take some effort to train yourself if you've been doing it for years.
It absolutely does. And I'll throw one more note on there. If you notice that you wake up in the morning after a night of sleep and you have a very dry mouth, it's an indication, or if you've got a lot of drool on your pillow, it's an indication that your mouth is open during the night. Those are valuable, really valuable hours for you to continue to train that nasal breathing. So maybe consider taping your mouth shut or
Mhm.
something along those lines. I'm a big
With special
advocate of
tape,
that.
not with just any old tape.
Not just duct tape. Yep. I know, I don't know how you're feeling on time. We do have a couple more questions in
Yeah,
here
let's
if you
hear
want to
them.
run through it. Okay.
Great.
From Danny, if going to 18,500 feet in 3 weeks, can I still get benefit from breath work? I'll turn 58 on my acclimation peak at 14,000 feet. Okay. This is a really tricky question, Danny, because I in no way want to say that breathwork training can shave off the time that you budget for acclimatization. There's a lot of things happening inside your body when you are acclimatizing. Okay. So we are not saying that you can then spare the time and skip out on acclimatization. Okay. What I will say about breathwork training, though, is it absolutely helps you to prime your body for the acclimatization that you're going to give it by making a few hypoxic adaptations in the body, by training the respiratory muscles to handle that thinner air as you climb. That's going to help hopefully keep your oxygen levels higher as you're in your acclimatization. And then there's a few protocols that we coach specifically around recovery breath work, which is specifically designed for an acclimatization hike. When you finish, you do this type of protocol, and that can help reoxygenate your muscles in particular that may be fatigued, which are probably facing low oxygen muscle saturation levels. So it's really a big picture thing that breathwork can contribute. But I do caution you to not think that you can do the breathwork training and then skip on the acclimatization.
Yeah, that's a really valid point.
From Jenny, I have a question about weight to carry. How much
Okay.
weight how much weight is on the sleds and on
Mm,
us?
yes. Great question, Jenny. So let's just say your total weight is going to be 80 pounds when you leave the airstrip. You want most of that to be in your sled because it's much easier to pull that weight than it is to carry it on your backpack. So you might have, using the 80-pound scenario, 30 pounds in your backpack and the remaining 50 pounds on your sled, some combination of that. Um, it's important to train both. So any alpine athlete, athletics athlete will pull a sled or a tire that weighs about 50 or 60 pounds in preparation to going to Denali. And what I hear consistently, they're lugging this giant SUV tire around their neighborhood, and then they actually get on the snow, and there's so much less friction that pulling that sled feels pretty easy. And it's, where they feel the strain is the weight that's in the backpack. So that's a typical division of weight, more of it always in your sled than on your back. And the key is to train for a little bit more than you think you'll be carrying so that when you actually get there and you're at altitude and stressed by being on an expedition, you're still feeling strong. Good
Cool.
question.
Cool. We have, it seems like one more here.
Sure.
Miriam asked, I'm an air traffic controller, so used to stressful situations, and I'm in
Cool.
very good, excellent shape. I would love to climb Denali, but never climb higher than 5,000 meters. How much training would it take to be ready for Denali?
So if you're in physical, like if you scored, pretty high on the assessment we just did, Miriam, I would say giving yourself 6 months is good. If you scored, in the low end, then I would give yourself longer, more like 9 months. I also consider for athletes, as I'm sort of, getting to know them, what your experience is following a training program. I don't know that I have hard data to support this, but I find that if you, let's say, were a college athlete or you trained for an Ironman as an adult and your body has had to work through the adaptations of a training program, that it's usually easier when you do it in the future, even if there's been a little break in time. So the assessment score is really good for that we just walked through. So definitely take the time to do that if you haven't already. And I would say if you're, in the upper end of those scores, that 6 months is great. On the low end, I'd plan for more like 9 months. Great question.
I think that's it, Lisa.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for, we're all busy. I appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully this was valuable. If you have, you'll get an email with a summary and a recording, then the downloads. If you have questions, want to chat more, please don't hesitate to reach out to Anthony or me. We'd be happy to chat and make sure you get all your questions answered. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye bye.